الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على مبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So we continue بإذن الله تعالى with our lessons and our reading of the tremendous treatise by Shaykh al-Islam, the Mujaddid, the Imam Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala, in which he titled شروط الصلاة وأركانها وواجباتها, the conditions of the prayer, his pillars and his obligations. And we spoke previously in relation to the first three of the conditions of the salah, and now we continue bi'idhnillahi ta'ala with the fourth condition of the prayer, and that is that he said rahimahullah ta'ala الشرط الرابع, the fourth condition, رفع الحدث وهو الوضوء المعروف وموجبه الحدث, the removal of ritual impurity, the removal of ritual impurity, and that is the well-known wudu, the wudu that is ma'ruf, that is well known. وَمُوجِبُهُ الْحَدَث, and what causes it to be obligatory is al-hadath, is impurity, ritual impurity. طيب, and al-Shaykh al-Allamah Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad hafidahullah ta'ala explained, and he said al-hadath huwa kullu kharijin min as-sabilayn. That hadath, the word hadath, that it refers to all of that which exits by way or from the sabilayn, from the private parts. وكذا أي ناقد للوضوء, and likewise anything that nullifies the wudu. والحدث هو الذي يوجب الوضوء, and hadath is that which makes wudu compulsory and mandatory. طيب, and likewise in another definition for al-hadath, that we can say that al-hadath is وصف قائم بالبدن يمنع من الصلاة ونحوها مما اشترط له الطهارة, that it is a description or a state that relates to the body, and it prevents from the salah and its like, from that which is conditional to at-tahara, to having purification. There is وصف قائم بالبدن يمنع من الصلاة ونحوها مما اشترط له الطهارة. There is a description or a state in relation to the body that prevents from the prayer, that prevents a person from praying and its likes, by way of ibadah, from that which is conditional to purification. طيب, ودليل اشتراطه, and the evidence for it being a condition is his statement sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لا يقبل الله الصلاة بغير طهور, that Allah Azza wa Jal does not accept a prayer or the prayer without purification. متفق عليه. And likewise his statement sallallahu alaihi wasallam, مفتاح الصلاة الطهور, that the key for the prayer is at-tahur, is purification. Therefore the key for something, meaning that the condition of it or a condition for it is purification. Then Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad hafidahullah ta'ala, that he goes on to explain, and he says وَالْحَدَث حَدَثَانِ, And hadath is of two types. حدث أكبر وهو ما يوجب الغسل وهو الجنابة والحيض والنفاس, the major impurity, and is that which necessitates and obligates the performance of ghusl, the making of ghusl. And that is the hadath which is either janabah, either a state of sexual impurity, or it is hayd, or it is the menses, or it is nifas, postnatal bleeding. And the second type, وحدث أصغر, the minor impurification. وهو ما يوجب الوضوء, and is that which necessitates and obligates one to perform the wudu. ورفع الحدث يكون بالغسل والوضوء لمن وجد الماء أو قدر على استعماله. And the removal of al-hadath that is done by way of ghusl, by way of washing the entire body, or it is done by way of wudu. For the one who has water, the one who finds and has water, and he is able to use the water. And for the one who has water and he is able to use the water. فإذا لم يوجد الماء أو وجد ولكن لم يقدر على استعماله انتقل إلى رفع كل من الحدث الأكبر والأصغر بالتيمم. As for if a person does not find water, or if he has water with him but he is unable to use the water, then it transitions, the ruling transitions to him removing the major and minor impurification by way of tayammum. وإذا تيمم للحدث الأكبر ثم وجد الماء اغتسل لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الصعيد الطيب طهور المسلم وإن لم يجد الماء 10 سنين فإذا وجد الماء فليمسه بشرته فإن ذلك خير. And if he has made tayammum for the major impurification, and then after he has made his tayammum, that he then comes across water, he then finds water, then he is to perform ghusl using that water. So if he has made his tayammum for a major impurification, and then he comes across water, he finds water, then he is to perform ghusl with that water. And that is due to his statement sallallahu alaihi wasallam that indeed clean earth is a purification for the Muslim. That indeed clean earth is a purification for the Muslim. Even if he does not find water for 10 years. And if he finds water, then let it touch his skin. Let him perform ghusl with that water. فإن ذلك خير. For indeed, that is good. أخرجه الترمذي وغيره عن أبي ذر رضي الله تعالى عنه وقال الترمذي حديث حسن صحيح. وانظر إرواء الغليل. طيب. وإذا اغتسل من عليه حدث أكبر ونوى رفع الحدث الأكبر والأصغر ارتفعا. And if he performs ghusl, with the one who has a major, or is in the state of a major impurification, that if he performs ghusl and he intends by way of his ghusl to remove both the minor and the major impurification, then they are both removed. Again, if he performs ghusl, and the one who is in a state of major impurification, and he intends by way of his ghusl that he is removing from himself the hadath al-akbar, the major impurification, wal-asghar, and the minor impurification, then they are both removed from him. If that is his intention. وأما إذا أفاض الماء على جسده في غسل الجمعة أو التبرد ونوى رفع الحدث الأصغر فإنه لا يرتفع. As for if he was to simply pour water over his entire body, for example in the ghusl of Jum'ah, or in order to cool himself down, and he intended to remove the minor impurification, then it will not be removed. لأن هذا الاغتسال ليس فيه رفع الحدث, because this type of washing, that it doesn't have within it the removal of impurification. طيب, then Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah ta'ala, that he begins to now mention the shurut al-wudu, that he includes the conditions for wudu in this fourth condition of the salah. He begins to mention the conditions for the wudu. So he said rahimahullah ta'ala, وَشُرُوطُهُ عَشَرَةٌ, and its conditions are 10. Its conditions are 10. Al-Islam, that a person is upon Islam. Wal-Aql, that a person has sanity. Wat-Tamyiz, that a person has reached the age of discernment. Those same 3 conditions that we discussed previously. Wal-Niyyah, and the intention. Was-Tishab, Hukmuha, and accompanying its ruling. بأن لا ينوي قطعها حتى تتم الطهارة, accompanying its ruling by not intending to cut it off, not intending to cut off the purification until it is complete, until the purification has been achieved and he has finished purifying himself. وانقطاع موجب, and also to cease that which causes the impurification, to cease that which causes him to perform that ritual purification. واستنجاء أو استجمار قبله, and to clean one's private parts before it. وطهورية ماء, وطهورية الماء, with pure water, using pure water. وإباحته, that is permissible. وإزالة ما يمنع وصوله إلى البشرة, and to remove all that which prevents water from reaching the skin. ودخول وقت على من حدثه دائم لفرضه, and the entering of its time for the one whose impurity is constant due to or when there is an obligation. طيب. So again, we will mention each one of these conditions and discuss it in some detail بإذن الله تعالى. So Shaykh Abdul Muhsin Al-Abbad حفظه الله تعالى, that he mentions تقدم الكلام على شروط الإسلام والعقل والتمييز, that we have already discussed previously the conditions of Islam and aql and sanity and tamyiz and reaching the age of discernment. وأما شرط النية, as for the condition of the niyyah, so now he begins to mention each condition. So he says, as for the condition of the niyyah, of the intention, فإنه عند وضوئه ينوي بقلبه رفع الحدث ولا يتلفظ بلسانه. That as for the condition of the intention, then when performing wudu, that he intends with his heart the removal of any impurification. وَلَا يَتَلَفَّظ بِلِسَانِهِ, and he does not pronounce it upon his tongue. He does not say that intention out loud upon his tongue, but rather he says it in his heart. It occurs in his heart. وَكَذَا فِي جَمِيعِ الْعِبَادَاتِ يَنْوِي بِقَلْبِهِ وَلَا يَتَلَفَّظُ بِلِسَانِهِ إِلَّا فِي الْحَجِّ وَالْعُمْرَةِ. And such is the case with all of the acts of worship, that he intends, or he makes his intention with his heart, in his heart, and he does not pronounce his intention upon his tongue, except for Hajj and Umrah. Except for Hajj and Umrah. فَلَهُ أَنْ يَتَلَفَّظَ بِمَا نَوَاهُ فَيَقُولُ. For him is then to pronounce it upon his tongue, and he says لَبَّيْكَ عُمْرَةً أو لَبَّيْكَ حَجًّا, or he says لَبَّيْكَ حَجًّا وَعُمْرَةً, that he pronounces the intention for Hajj and Umrah upon his tongue. And this is not done by way of simply pronouncing, or for the sole purpose of pronouncing the intention out loud, but rather it is done, ayyuhal ikhwah, because it is a part of the rituals of Hajj. It is a part of the rituals of Hajj that one pronounces this intention out loud. That he says لبيك عمرة أو لبيك حج أو لبيك حجا وعمرة, that he makes his intention out loud. ولو غسل وجهه عند قيامه من النوم لا يريد الوضوء ثم بدا له أن يتوضأ فإنه يلزمه أن يغسل وجهه للوضوء ولا يكتفي بغسله السابق لعدم وجود النية الوضوء عند ذلك الغسل. And if he was to wash his face, for example, when he was to wake up from his sleep, and he did not intend initially to make wudu, but rather he intended just to wash his face, and then it became apparent to him that perhaps he should make wudu. So initially he never intended on making wudu, that he only intended to simply wash his face. But then as he had washed his face, that it became apparent to him that he should now do wudu and make wudu. Then therefore it is that is not sufficient that he has already washed his face. It is not sufficient, it does not suffice with the washing of the face, meaning that he does not now continue and carry on to make his wudu. Why? Because his niyyah, his intention for wudu, was not present at the start. His intention for wudu was not present at the start. Then he says, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, وَلَوْ اغْتَسَلَ من عليه جنابة للتبرد ناسيا الجنابة فإنه لا يجزئه عن غسل الجنابة لعدم وجود النية. And likewise, if one was to perform ghusl and he was in a state of janaba, he's in a state of sexual impurity, and he made this ghusl with the intention of cooling himself down, and he completely forgot about the fact that he was in a state of janaba, then that ghusl is not sufficient for him. The ghusl is not sufficient for him. Why? Because again, his intention was not present. And this is an important point to make. The intention, there has to be at the beginning of the action. As he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that indeed actions are but by intentions. So the intention has to be present. And the niyyah تميز بين ثلاثة أشياء, that the intention, that it distinguishes and separates between three affairs. The intention, it separates and it distinguishes between three affairs. The first affair is that the niyyah تميز بين المخلص وغير المخلص, that it distinguishes between the one who is sincere, the one who is doing the act of worship sincerely for Allah Azza wa Jal, and the one who is not sincere. That's the first affair, that it distinguishes between the one who is sincere in his action, in his act of ibadah, and the one who is insincere, the one who is not doing his act of ibadah out of sincerity for Allah Azza wa Jal. That's the first affair. The second affair is that the niyyah تميز بين العبادات والعادات, that the intention, that it distinguishes between acts of worship, ibadat, acts of worship, والعادات, and between that which is just a custom, that which is just an ordinary act. And these are the examples that we just mentioned now, that Shaykh Abdul Muhsin Hafidahullah Ta'ala mentioned in his explanation, that these examples that we just mentioned, that they are in relation to this second type, or the second affair, that the niyyah, that it distinguishes between that which is an act of worship and that which is done purely and solely as a custom or a tradition, or just as a normal act. طيب. And likewise, the third affair is that the niyyah, the intention, that it distinguishes بين العبادات بعضها عن بعض, that it distinguishes likewise between acts of worship, some of them from another, and it distinguishes between acts of worship, بعضها أو بعضها عن بعض, one from another. وإذا اتحد في الصفة والفعل, even if the act of worship, or those two acts of worship in which it distinguishes between, even if they are the same in terms of their description and in terms of their act. طيب. Again, the intention, it distinguishes between acts of worship, one from another, even if those acts of worship be the same in relation to their sifah, in relation to their attribute, or how they are performed. For example, and a clear example of this is, for example, the one who makes jam' بين الظهر والعصر, the one who combines between the dhuhr prayer and the asr prayer. طيب. So a person is combining between both dhuhr and asr, and both of them are the same in terms of their sifah, in terms of their attribute and their fi'l and how they are performed. They are both 4 raka'at, they are both the same in terms of how they are prayed. But what distinguishes between the one who is combining, whether he is praying dhuhr or asr, is the niyyah in this instance. Why? Because if he is combining between them, then the time period does not distinguish between them. Why? Because he is praying dhuhr and asr at the time of dhuhr or at the time of asr, and not in their individual time, that he is combining between them. So therefore, what distinguishes between them in this instance is the niyyah, is the intention solely alone. طيب. And then he goes on to say, حفظه الله تعالى, ومع نية الطهارة يستصحب حكمها حتى تتم الطهارة. and with the intention of the tahara, with the intention of purification, that it has to be accompanied, its ruling has to be accompanied with it until the tahara is complete. Meaning that his intention يستمر أو تستمر النية معه, that the intention, it continues with him throughout that entire act. That he has to not only make his intention from the beginning with his heart, but that intention likewise, that it carries on with him throughout the entire act. فَلَا يَنْوِي قَطَعَهَا. So he does not intend, for example, to cut it off. Because the moment that he intends to cut off that particular act, then it is cut off. Why? Because the intention is no longer present, so therefore the condition is not fulfilled. So the intention has to be with him and present throughout that entire act of worship. طيب. فلو نوى قطع النية في أثناء الوضوء ثم أراد إكمال الوضوء فليس له ذلك. So, for example, if he intended, or he cut off his intention whilst he is performing wudu, and then he wanted to complete and finish his wudu, then that is not for him. It's not for him to do so. بل يتعين عليه البدء بالوضوء من أوله. But rather it is upon him that he starts the wudu again from the beginning. ولا يكمل ما بقي عليه. And he does not complete that which is left from the wudu, but rather he starts again from the beginning. لأنه قد ألغى ما حصل منه. Because he has cancelled out that which he has just done. And he's cancelled out by way of him cutting off his intention, that he has now cancelled that entire act of worship, or he has now cancelled that entire wudu, and he is to begin and start again from the beginning. طيب. وهذا هو الشرط الخامس, and that was the fifth condition. والشرط السادس, and the sixth condition, انقطاع موجب. انقطاع موجب, that he ceases with that which will compel him to make the purification. That he ceases to do that which will compel him to make the purification. أي انقطاع موجب الوضوء وهو الحدث, meaning that he ceases to do that which will now compel him to make wudu, and that is al-hadath, that he ceases to perform and to continue to carry out the hadath. وذلك بأن ينتظر عند قضاء حاجته حتى انقطاع ما يخرج من السبيلين. And that is that he waits until he has finished fulfilling his need, and that has completely cut off that which exits from the private areas. فلا يشرع في الوضوء قبل الانقطاع. So he does not begin now to make wudu when he has not even finished. So he does not begin to make his wudu before he has ceased and cut off that which he was doing, and that which causes the wudu to be made and obligates it to be made. طيب. والشرط السابع, the seventh condition, الاستنجاء أو الاستجمار, to clean one's private parts, to clean one's private parts. And istinja والاستجمار, these two words تطلق على التنظف, that they are both used to express cleanliness. وإزالة النجاسة بالماء أو بالحجارة, and to remove the impurity, to remove the impurity with either water or حجارة, or a stone. And that which takes its place, or that which is similar to it. طيب. فالاستنجاء أو استجمار قبل الوضوء. And this occurs before the wudu. That he cleans his private parts before the wudu if there is a need to do so. وهذا إذا كان الخارج من السبيلين بولا أو غائطا. And this is if that which is exiting from his private parts is either urine or feces. أما خروج الريح فإنه لا استنجاء ولا استجمار فيه. As for if he passes wind, then there is no need for him to clean his private parts. والاستجمار يغني عن الاستنجاء إذا لم يتجاوز الخارج موضع العادة. And istijmar, using a rock or that which takes its place, a stone or that which takes its place, that it suffices from a person using water, as long as it does not exceed beyond the normal area, beyond the normal area that has come out of him, meaning that he has not urinated on any item of clothing or other than that. فإن تجاوزه احتيج مع ذلك إلى الاستنجاء لإزالة النجاسة. For if he exceeds beyond that area, then he is in need of making istinja, then he is in need of using water in order to get rid of the impurity. طيب. والشرط الثامن, and the eighth condition, طهورية ماء وإباحته, the purification of water and its permissibility, meaning it is permissible to use. وهما شيئان, and they are two separate affairs. والشيخ رحمه الله جعل الشروط 10 وذكر بعد هذا شرطين، وعلى هذا يكون اعتبر الطهورية والإباحة شرطا واحدا. And the Shaykh rahimahullah, being Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala, that he made these conditions into 10. And then he mentioned after them these two separate conditions. So, in accordance to that means that he considered both the tuhuriyah, both the purification of water and the ibaha and the permissibility of the water, that he considered it as one single shart. He considered it as one single shart. And you find many of the ulama that they mention them as two individual conditions in and of themselves. طيب. ويشترط في ماء الوضوء أن يكون طهورا فلا يتطهر بماء متنجس. And it is a condition in relation to the water that is used for wudu that it be water that is purified. Water that is purified. For he cannot purify himself with water that has become corrupted by any najasa, that has become corrupted by any impurity. نعم. And the فروق بين الماء الطهور وماء المتنجس, and the differences between the water that is pure, the water that is pure and that is allowed for us to purify ourselves with, and between the water that has now become impure and therefore impermissible to purify ourselves with, that the differences between them, as Ahl al-Ilm mention, that they are thalatha, that there are 3 differences between them. Now again, that the differences between water that is pure and that is permissible to be used as a purification to make wudu or ghusl, and between the water that is now become impure and that is now impermissible for us to use in order to purify ourselves, that the differences between the two are free, according to the most correct opinion. Wallahu a'lam. The first one the Ahl al-Ilm mention is لونه, is its color. طيب, that if the color of the water changes, then therefore it's become impure. It's become impure and is impermissible to use. And the second one is طعمه, is taste. If the taste of the water changes, then therefore it's become impure, become corrupted with an impurity, and therefore is impermissible to use. And the third one is ريحه, is its smell. If the smell of the water has been corrupted and has changed, then therefore it is impermissible to use. فإذا تغير أحد أوصافه الثلاث صار الماء متنجسا بنجس. For if one of these qualities that they have changed, one of these three qualities have changed, then the water becomes impure. ويدل على ذلك قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, and as an evidence for that is his statement صلى الله عليه وسلم, الماء طهور لا ينجسه شيئا, that water is pure and nothing can render it impure. That water is pure and nothing can render it impure. وزاد الدارقطني, and Daraqutni رحمه الله تعالى, that he included the wording, or he added the wording إلا إذا تغير لونه أو ريحه أو طعمه, except if its color changes, or its smell changes, or its taste changes. طيب, that he included, or he added this addition to the wording of the hadith. And this addition, this ziyada, is ضعيفة. This addition is weak. This addition is weak. ضعفها العلماء. The ulama, the scholars have declared that this addition to the hadith, that it is weak. However, even though it is weak, that it is acted upon. طيب, it is acted upon. And bal, that there are some of the ulama who have that they have reported that there is ijma' على القول بها, that there is ijma', that there is a consensus upon this statement, upon acting upon this statement. طيب, then Shaykh Abdul Muhsin حفظه ta'ala, there he goes on to explain وأن يكون الماء مباحا, and that likewise the water is permissible, meaning it is permissible to use. ليس مغصوبا, that has not been seized, has not been obtained forcibly. وهذا الأخير محل خلاف وفي اشتراطه نظر. And this last bit here, this last statement, this last bit in relation to the water being permissible to use, that this is somewhere where the scholars, or this is a place where the scholars have differed in relation to, and that they have differed over whether this is a condition or not. طيب, and in placing it as a condition, that there is nadhar in relation to placing it as a condition. والأظهر أن من توضأ بماء المغصوب فالوضوء صحيح. And what is most apparent is that the one who performs wudu using water that has been seized or obtained forcibly, that is unlawful for him to use, that he has taken someone else's water, that the wudu is sahih, the wudu is correct. Again, what is most apparent is that the one who has performed wudu with water that he has obtained forcibly, that he has taken, that doesn't belong to him, that his wudu is sahih. his wudu is correct, it is valid. وهو آثم على الغصب, and he is sinful for obtaining it forcibly. He is sinful for obtaining it forcibly, for seizing it. ومثله من صلى في أرض مغصوبة, and similar to this issue is the one who prayed in a land that has been seized. The one who prays in a land that has been stolen or seized or obtained forcibly. Or for example, أو صلى في ثوب حرير, or the one who prays in a thawb, in a garment that is made from harir, that is made from silk. فإن صلاته صحيحة, that his prayer is correct. His prayer is correct. وهو آثم في الغصب وفي لبس الحرير, whilst he is sinful for seizing or obtaining that land forcibly, and he is sinful for praying in a silk garment. But الشاهد, the point being that his salah is accepted. طيب. والشرط التاسع, and the 9th condition, إزالة ما يمنع وصوله إلى البشرة, removing all of that which will prevent the water from reaching or from touching his skin. فلا بد في الوضوء من وصول الماء إلى أعضاء الوضوء. For it is a must in relation to the wudu that the water reaches all of the limbs of the wudu, all of the areas that he must wash in his wudu. ويجب إزالة ما يمنع وصوله إليها. It is an obligation that he removes anything that will prevent the water from reaching those areas. كالطين والعجين والطلاء, such as clay or dough or paint, ونحو ذلك, and the similitude of that. مما يغطي البشرة, from that which covers the skin. أما ما يغير اللون ولا يغطي البشرة كالحنة فإن ذلك لا يؤثر. As for that which changes the color of the skin, changes the color of the skin, but it does not cover the skin. It does not cover the skin, meaning it does not prevent water from reaching the skin, such as henna, then that does not affect him. That does not affect his wudu. طيب. والشرط العاشر, and the 10th condition, دخول وقت على من حدثه دائم لفرضه, that the entering of the time, the time for salah upon the one who is hadath is da'im, that he is consistently in a state of impurification and he has no control over it. والمعنى أن من كان به سلس بول أو تخرج منه الريح باستمرار, and the meaning of this is that the one who has salas bawl, which is a urinary infection, that causes him to urinate uncontrollably, or the one who has no control over the passing of wind, that he passes wind constantly and frequently and he's unable to control it. وكذا المرأة المستحاضة, and likewise the woman who has a prolonged menses or irregular bleeding. فإن هؤلاء يتوضؤون عند دخول الوقت لكل صلاة مفروضة. For these types of people, that they perform wudu at or when the time has entered for every single salah, فلو توضأ أحدهم لصلاة الظهر بعد دخول وقتها وصلاها ثم دخل عليه وقت العصر فلا يصلي العصر بوضوء الظهر. So if one of them performed wudu for Salat al-Dhuhr after the time for Dhuhr had entered, and then he prayed his Dhuhr prayer, and then the time of Asr entered, then he should not pray Asr until he has made another wudu, until he's made wudu for Salatul Asr. And that's the meaning here, yani that he makes wudu for each and every prayer. He makes wudu for each and every prayer as it enters, and he prays that prayer, and then when the next prayer comes in, that he then makes wudu again and prays that prayer. طيب بل عليه أن يتوضأ بعد دخول العصر لصلاة العصر. Upon him is that he makes wudu after the entering of Asr for the Asr prayer. ويدل لذلك أمره صلى الله عليه وسلم لفاطمة بنت أبي حبيش وكانت مستحاضة أن تتوضأ لكل صلاة. أخرجه البخاري من حديث عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها وانتهى كلامه حفظها الله. طيب. So, as an evidence for this is his command, the command of the Prophet ﷺ, that he commanded Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh, and she was someone who was mustahada, who had irregular bleeding and a prolonged menses, that he commanded her ﷺ to perform wudu for every single prayer. For every single prayer. طيب, and the hadith that the Shaykh Hafidahullah Ta'ala is referring to here, and we will mention the hadith in its loved bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, in its wording, and that is that Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh radiyallahu ta'ala anha, that she said, Ya Rasulullah, inni imra'atun ustahad fala athur. That she said, O Messenger of Allah, that I am a woman who has irregular bleeding, I have a prolonged menses. فلا أطهر, I do not become pure. أفأدع الصلاة, should I leave off the prayer? فقال صلى الله عليه وسلم لا إنما ذلك عرق وليس بحيض. Then he said صلى الله عليه وسلم, no, do not leave off the prayer. For indeed this is due to a vein and not menstruation. Meaning that the blood, that it comes from a vein, and it is not the blood of the menses. Then he said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, فَإِذَا أَقْبَلَتْ حَيْضَتُكِ فَدَعِ الصَّلَاةِ. So if your menses begins, then leave off the prayer. وَإِذَا أَدْبَرَتْ فَاغْسِلِي عَنْكِ الدَّمْ وَصَلِّي. And if, or when it finishes, then remove and wash the blood from you, perform the ghusl and pray. وفي لفظ, and in a narration, or in a wording, ثُمَّ تَوَضَّئِي لِكُلِّ صَلَاةٍ. Then perform wudu for every single prayer. حتى يجيء ذلك الوقت. Until that time comes, when the time enters. طيب. So as for the woman who has a prolonged or irregular bleeding, then for her are three affairs. For her are three affairs. That either she stops praying in accordance to the aada that she was upon before she began to have this irregular bleeding, and either she continues with that cycle, that same cycle that she had before that she began to have this irregular bleeding, or the second affair, that if she had no particular cycle and it was a random cycle, then she is to distinguish between that which is hayd, that which is dam al-hayd, that which is the menstrual blood, and other than it. And then she stops performing her salah, of course, when she sees that she has menstrual blood. And if she is unable to distinguish, and this is the third affair, the third stage, then she is to stop praying in accordance to the cycle of ghalib a'adat al-nisa, of the majority of that which typically that the women experience as a cycle. So they are the three steps or the three stages in which she takes if this occurs to her. طيب, and بإذن ta'ala we'll conclude there before we go into the furud of wudu, the obligations of the wudu, inshallah ta'ala, because no doubt that the obligations of wudu likewise are detailed, and each one requires some brief explanation. So بإذن ta'ala that we will stop there. ونكتفي بهذا وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وآخر الدعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وبارك الله فيكم. طيب, there are some questions, and some of them we will address and we will mention as we get further into the book بإذن ta'ala. So perhaps we will postpone them for them, and we will mention some of them in detail بإذن ta'ala as we go into some of the issues, that we will try to include them and address them بإذن ta'ala. So we will save them for them. And there are some questions that we will address بإذن ta'ala privately, as it is not in relation to that which we have discussed, and it's somewhat detailed. So we will try to address them, and if not, then we will forward them to our mashayikh and our du'at بإذن ta'ala to address. طيب, but what I will address inshallah ta'ala is a couple of questions in relation to applying for Medina University. So the question is, how can someone increase their chances at getting into Medina University, and any tips? طيب, and what I will say just briefly in relation to this, without going into too much detail, is that a person, firstly, that he trusts in Allah Azza wa Jal, that he applies and he trusts in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he prays istikhara, and he makes dua for being accepted into the university. And this is very important, ya ikhwan. And it's needless to say, yet there is no doubt that many of the people, even though it's needless to say, that you will find that they still do not take these steps. And it's ajib, that you ask someone who has applied and yet they have not prayed istikhara, that they have not taken the means, that they do not make dua frequently for it. So even though it is needless to say that there is also a need to say it, we must say it because it is not acted upon. And likewise we say it because sometimes it can be very random in terms of the acceptance process. Many of those who that you will speak about in relation to the acceptance process, and that they will tell you that sometimes that it is very random in relation to it. And I've seen applications where you almost think that certainly this individual is accepted, and qadar Allah ma sha'a fa'al, that he never gets accepted. And then I've seen instances whereby a person looks less likely to be accepted, or he doesn't fit any of the criteria or many of the things that are perhaps required of him, and yet he ends up being accepted. So no doubt that the affair is one of tawfiq from Allah Azza wa Jal, and I encourage a person who applies and intends on going, that he makes dua to Allah Azza wa Jal, and that he entrusts his affair to him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that he prays istikhara, and that he does what he can whilst he is here to prepare himself, and he doesn't wait and rely solely upon his application and his acceptance in order to seek ilm, but rather he starts with that which he has by way of the durus that are available to him. And walillah alhamd, that there are many lessons that are taking place, that if a person was serious and really intended to seek ilm and to ground himself, that mashallah tabarakallah, that we have many of our du'at and our mashayikh teaching multiple lessons in various different topics and different ulum, different sciences of al-Islam, that one can no doubt pursue, and that he can refer back to those lessons, and that he can increase himself and build himself up slowly bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So that's one thing that I would say in relation to that. نعم والله أعلم. طيب إخوان, inshallah ta'ala, we'll suffice with that bi'idhnillah. And anything that has not been addressed, that we will try to address it privately bi'idhnillah. And if not, then we will try to refer it to those who are better suited to address it and to answer it bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. وبارك الله فيكم وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.